Hi guys, it's Rob from Royal Balls. In the last terrarium update I showed you that this guy in here for some reason had started to get very unsettled, not very natural behaviour, constantly trying to escape, and so we put him in a tub to see whether we could calm him down. So the first job is to have a look at the guy in the tub and see whether it worked. Okay, so here we've got the terrarium guy now in his tub, and you be the judge as to whether he's settled down. He's been in there for 2 days, and he does come out and check the camera, but it was also feeding night tonight, so he did get fed. All the snakes do this when the camera first goes in the tub. They all like to check it out. They're very curious, I suppose. Just seeing what it is that's invading their tub. You can see the date and time stamp in the top left, so it's now 7:30 at night. It's already dark outside. And there we go. He settled so well in his tub he didn't hesitate for a second to eat. I had to adjust the hide so that you could see what was going on, and that made him let go of the rat. This is an African soft fur. Never feed live unsupervised, guys. That's me turning the lights on in the room. I'm back in there doing something else, so you can see that actually in the tub, when the lights go on, you can actually see that the lights are on in the room. Back to the feeding. Never feed unsupervised when you feed live, but of course I had the camera, so I was checking out what this guy was doing on my hand phone, so no need to make sure that he's eaten. I could see that he had. Drags it to the back of the tub away from where the camera is so he can eat undisturbed. And there he goes back into the hide. But you will notice, as he did in the terrarium, that after eating he doesn't go to sleep. He sticks his head out of the hide and sets up an ambush position again. This is much more like the behaviour that we were seeing for the first 9 months in the terrarium. There he goes. And I have noticed with the camera on that all of my snakes seem to do an awful lot of yawning. That jaw realignment and yawning motion, they do it a lot more than I thought they did. So there you go, guys. The second night in the tub. You be the judge. Has this guy settled back down? There's the yawn. Is he behaving in a much more relaxed manner than he was in the terrarium for those 2 nights that I shot the video when he was going mental? He also uses that same motion that he did in the tubes. Once he's inside the tube or inside the hide, when he sticks his head out, he reverses back in. Notice the timestamp? It's now 10 o'clock at night. These guys are not active all night long. They're active in short bursts, usually when it first gets dark for a couple of hours, which is a good time to feed, and then they curl up for the rest of the night, not moving very much, and then they're active again in the early hours of the morning pre-dawn. I'd have to say from my side of things, guys, that this has worked. The snake has settled down. I'm much more comfortable with what I'm seeing here in terms of behavior from this snake than I was for those 2 nights in the terrarium when he was all over the place. This is much more like the first 9 months. This is much more like what I hoped I would see when he went back into the tub. That's another yawn. It's 4 o'clock in the morning now. And just so that you can contrast the behavior in the tub with what he was doing in the terrarium when I first noticed something was wrong, you can see the difference. This is footage that I showed in the previous video when I first noticed that something was wrong in the terrarium, and this guy had adjusted his behavior. So compare and contrast. Which one do you think is the most natural? For me, this is stereotypical behavior. 2 nights in a row he repeated this behavior and he's trying to escape. This is about as close to pacing the cage as you could get in a snake.
Okay, clearly that has worked. The guy has settled down quite nicely in the tub, and there's been a lot of speculation as to the reason why that technique works. So I was requested to stick the camera into a few other tubs and do some comparisons of behaviour. If this guy is going absolutely mental because he's trying to get at the girls, what are the other males doing? Are they going mental as well? What are the females doing to create all this ruckus? Before we do that, I'm just going to frame these experiments in the context of wild snakes, and I'm going to reference you the 1997 original ball pythons in the wild video that has been published on the Reptiles and Research channel. 180 miles of transects, 206 ball pythons studied, and an average population density of about 1 ball python per acre. An acre is about the size of a football field, so that means that they were finding 1 ball python about every football field. So if you look behind me here, you will see that the population density of snakes in this room is way in excess of wild populations. Now, the snakes in wild populations can and do smell each other. They seek each other out, they find each other, and they successfully breed over very long distances. In tubs, the distances are measured in inches. These snakes are living in very close proximity to each other. This terrarium is right next door to a whole series of tubs in here. So, given that this guy went mental, and we suspect that it was because he was trying to get at all the girls that are in the room here, let's take a look at some of the other males and see what they're doing.
Okay guys, so this is Iron Man Light, and I've put the camera in mid-afternoon. You can see it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is a male that is being bred this season, and as soon as I put the camera in, you can see it disturbs him quite significantly. He wakes up and he is constantly checking out the camera. Normally, at this time of the day, this guy would be fast asleep. When I put the camera in, he was. You can see from the timestamp that the motion is pretty consistent. Now it's about 7 o'clock at night. Typically my snakes get active around this time, and sure enough, he wakes up and starts checking out the camera again. Now, because I get warnings on my hand phone when the camera detects motion, at this stage of the evening, the hand phone was going off constantly with warnings. This guy is moving around a lot. All his attention is focused on the camera. He isn't settled at all. He does not like the camera in there. And in fact, he starts knocking the camera about. Constantly checking out the camera. Non-stop. There's those yawns again. And you can see that he's almost constantly facing the threat. He doesn't turn away. And now he's actually getting physical with the camera here. He's actually pushing it and shoving it. He's trying to make the camera go away, but the camera won't go away. Here he goes, shoving the camera, trying to get on top of it and dominate it. And look at the timestamp, guys. He's been doing this for hours now. Non-stop. This behavior is no longer curiosity. This behavior is combat. This snake wants the camera out of his tub. He does not want it to be in there, and he's pushing and shoving the camera as he would if it was another snake that had intruded into his space. This is snake combat. And he's not giving up. He really wants this camera gone out of his tub. You see, he climbs on top of the camera, shoving the camera around again. And it's now after 10 o'clock at night and he's still going at it. And I couldn't take it any longer, guys. My phone was going off all the time with the movement alerts. So eventually I came down and removed the camera. It's pretty obvious this snake does not like the camera in his tub. Okay, so on the next night I tried it with a different male. This is another adult male, but this one is not being bred. Not that it made much difference. You can see that I put the camera in the early hours of the evening. It's 6 o'clock at night before it gets dark, and again the camera gets the snake's immediate attention. And this one, if anything, is even more violent than the last one. These males are extremely territorial. They do not like their tubs being invaded by any strange object. I was actually quite staggered by this behaviour. I did not realise that the males were quite so sensitive to intrusion. I did not realise that they were quite so territorial. Now remember that this is an illustration of physically what happens during snake combat. But before it ever gets to this stage, all of these snakes are putting out their own scent, which other snakes can smell. And I'm assuming that a less dominant male would never get to the stage of intruding upon an aggressive male. The smell would put them off and they would not engage in physical contact or combat. It would be quite rare in nature for two snakes to actually meet. The scent of another snake would put them off. Only when two males are closely matched would there actually be physical altercation. So if all your males in their racks are doing this to put off intruders, if all your males are close together, they're upsetting each other with their scent before they even see each other. This guy wants the camera gone. You can see he's shoving around the camera and he actually got tangled up in it.
Okay, well that was a bit of a shock. The mature males are usually sitting quite casually in their tubs, and the moment that I put a camera into their tub, they became extremely aggressive towards the camera. They did not like the camera, to the extent that I found myself having to rescue the camera. They were knocking 7 bells out of it. I couldn't get any sleep because my motion sensor alarm was going off constantly, and I had to come down and rescue the camera from each of the males' tubs that I used. Now on the second night, when I rescued the camera from the male's tub, it was about midnight and I couldn't stand it any longer. I came down and rescued the camera. The male was shoving the camera all over the tub and he'd got it pinned into one corner of the tub. So I actually decided that I would check and see what the other snakes were doing while this guy was knocking 7 bells out of the camera. The terrarium guy in his tub was fast asleep in his hide. The snake that I used on the first evening up in the rack here was awake but wasn't mobile. He was in the back of the tub. He lifted his head gently when I opened the tub and then went back to sleep. So this is definitely an aggressive response towards the intrusion of the camera.
So when I rescued the camera that night, I checked the terrarium guy in his tub and he's fast asleep. Quite settled. And I also checked Iron Man Light, the aggressive snake from the night before, and sure enough, he was quite settled. These guys are definitely responding to the intrusion of a foreign object into their tubs. When there's nothing in their tub, they're actually quite settled.
Now, for all you guys that like in-tub enrichment, on a previous video I've already noted that sometimes the snake does not respond to in-tub enrichment in the way that we intended. They treat it as an intruder. They will try to dominate it. They push it and shove it all over the tub, particularly the males, especially if that toy has been used in another tub that a male has been in and is carrying the scent of another male. It drives them absolutely crazy, and they will spend hours and hours trying to eject the toy from their tub. They do not like the intrusion of a stranger. If that doesn't work and they cannot eject the toy from the tub, they will move to the other end of the tub as far away from the toy as they can possibly get, and they will sulk.
So here we have a male who shoved the toy right to the end of his tub, and he's on top of it trying to dominate it. And if that doesn't work, it won't go away, sulk in a corner. Here's another one, hiding behind the water bowl because the intruder won't go away. And another example, the intruder won't go away, so I'm going to sulk.
So what I'm seeing here in my snake room is male snakes that are absolutely hyper. When I put my hand into the tub, they shove my hand away as well. They treat it in exactly the same way as the camera. So they're hypersensitive to intrusion, they're highly territorial, and they do not like the presence of other males. I am going to suggest that the guy in this terrarium here is right next door to some breeder males. He is responding not to the scent of females. Yes, he has reached sexual maturity, so he's now aware of females, but he's acutely aware of larger, more aggressive males in close proximity to his tub that would kick him out if they discovered him. He became unsettled not because of the females, which he wants to be close to females, but he's very wary of the breeder males here that are much larger and more aggressive, and the scent that these males are putting out is what unsettled the male in the terrarium. It's not the females, they like the females, it's the presence of other males. Now back to ball pythons in the wild. They were digging up some burrows that contained both male and female snake together. Not necessarily in exactly the same portion of the burrow, not necessarily snuggled up next to each other, but I think what's happening in the wild is that a male snake has to move the length of a football field in order to find a receptive female. Once he's found her, he's not going to go back the length of the football field to his original burrow. He is going to take up residence next to that female. She does not want him in her space, so he may be next door, but he doesn't move far. And what he's doing while he's in that locality is defending that female against the encroachment of other males. He wants to breed with her. He does not want to let other males anywhere near that female. This is why this male snake here, when he reached sexual maturity, became unsettled, because the breeder males in these tubs right next door, far too close for comfort, unsettled him, and he wanted to get away from the males. He did not want to try to find females. He is being outcompeted by larger, more aggressive males in these tubs right next door. How close is too close? Well, obviously I moved him to the other end of the room over here. He's in a rack with other immature snakes and yearlings, so we've moved him several feet. That distance is obviously enough for him to be able to settle back down and not be disturbed by the presence of these big aggressive males over here. So how many of us in our snake rooms keep males over here and females over here? Where in nature do males and females get segregated? Certainly it happens in some species of fish. The males go to different parts of the planet than the females in order to feed. Great white sharks, for example. Marlin, they do the same thing. The males go to a different place to the females. But that is usually quite rare, and certainly ball pythons are found in close proximity to each other. They do not cohabit, they're solitary animals, but they do live in the same space. The males do not migrate long distances away from the females. So if you're keeping a rack full of males, bear in mind that each of these males is going to defend his territory and defend his females. Okay, he's in a tub, so he can't actually do that, but the sense that he is putting out, and the other snakes in close proximity to him, if they are males, can smell that. So I'm going to suggest that when your males get unsettled during the breeding season, it's not because of the presence of females. They want to be close to females. What they're responding to is the presence of other, more dominant, more aggressive males. Move your males away from the other males and they will settle down. You don't need to move them away from the females. Females, by the same token, do not like the presence of males. They do not want to be mated all the time. They only need the male for a very short period of time, and then they also do not like his presence. So you will see similar behaviour from the females. If they are in close proximity to an aggressive breeding male, they will try to move away from him. They will become unsettled and move away. So again, if that happens to your females, you can move your female away from the male, and it only takes a few feet. They tolerate proximity, just not extremely close proximity. So I believe that's why the technique of moving tubs works. You're moving snakes away from breeder males who are very territorial and very aggressive towards other snakes. So the next job was to check out some of the females in the tubs, and I was absolutely staggered. For a species of snake where the male and the female look so identical, I could not believe the difference in behaviour. Females could be a completely different species. We've seen that in my free roaming. It's the males that like to free roam. The females generally don't, although they will participate. But the females are pretty chill. Yes, when I put the camera in, they come over and investigate it, but they do not try and kick it out of the tub. It doesn't disturb them. They don't go at it non-stop, and I was able to leave the camera inside the tub of the females all night long and get a decent night's sleep. The females behave completely differently. They are much more docile, much less active than the males. Let's take a look.
So when I couldn't stand it anymore and I rescued the camera from the second male's tub, I put the camera straight in with a female, and this female didn't even wake up. You can see the timestamp is 5 o'clock in the morning. She was 5 hours fast asleep and paid no attention whatsoever until the early hours of the morning when she comes and checks out the camera. Having checked out the camera, she moves around a little bit, goes back in her hide and goes back to sleep. She could not care less. This female is not being bred. She is 2 years old and will be on the breeding roster next season, but for this season she has not been paired. She's curious about the camera, but she's not actually in combat with the camera. She was inactive for most of the night. This is normally the period in a morning when my female snakes that are gravid start to lay. Female ball pythons always lay first thing in the morning, just before dawn. Now you can see her going back into a hide. It's a small hide. How on earth a snake of this size manages to squeeze itself into that little tub, I have no idea. This is a second female on a different night, and you can see when I put the camera in, she checks out the camera initially, but she doesn't start shoving and pushing it around. This is a female that is being bred this season. She hasn't ovulated yet. She checks out the camera when it first goes in the tub, but the motion sensor was not going off constantly all night long. You can see long periods of inactivity where she's doing absolutely nothing. She's active for a little while in the evening when it first gets dark. She does lift her head and trigger the motion sensor at intervals during the night, but she's not moving around a great deal. She's sleeping most of the time. And then she's active again first thing in the morning, but not aggressive towards the camera. You can see that she's pretty chill. She's not restless or moving around constantly like the males were. She's nowhere near as territorial as the males about her tub space. Not moving around much at all during the night. Sleeping for long intervals when the motion sensor didn't go off, so I was actually able to sleep, and I was actually able to leave the camera in her tub all night long, in complete contrast to the males, which I couldn't stand the motion sensor going off all the time. The males were absolutely hammering the camera. The females appeared not to care too much. You can see the yawns again. All my snakes do that. She's pretty chill. Remember, the motion sensor is only triggered when the snake moves, so there are long intervals when the snake was not moving, which you obviously don't see on camera, but I certainly notice when I'm trying to sleep. Early hours of the morning, she's active again and moves around her tub a little bit more than she did during the night. This is again fairly typical of my snakes. Mornings and evenings is when they're most active.
Now, I noticed in some of the comments on both Dave Kaufman's video and the earlier ball pythons in the wild video, both of which are referenced below, all the snakes were found underground. They were dug out of burrows and they were dug out of termite mounds. In fact, of 206 snakes in the original survey, only one was found in a tree. Can ball pythons climb? Yes, they can. They're not very good at it, but they can do it. But I'm not a statistician. I haven't worked out the p-values or the probability of random behaviour given those statistics, but 1 out of 206 would seem to be pretty convincing to me. Ball pythons do not generally climb trees. In fact, I noticed in both videos that the terrain that the ball pythons were living in actually contained very few trees. Certainly not enough trees for them to make a living out of or to climb regularly. So it would not appear that it's actually a critical component of their husbandry. The Nigeria study that suggested semi-arboreality was from a completely different environmental setting. It was actually a tropical rainforest with lots of trees. Not surprising that the behaviour is a little bit different in that area. But there were some people that insisted that at night your ball python springs into action, comes out of its burrow and goes wandering off and climbing trees. If you've ever watched your ball pythons, you will see that they're not a very dynamic snake. It's unlikely that they're ever going to leap into action at any time. And in fact, I've noticed that my snakes are active for just a couple of hours of the day. They're active first thing in the evening when it first gets dark. They go back to sleep and sleep all night long, and then they're active again in the early hours of the morning pre-dawn for perhaps a couple of hours. And you can see that in the videos of the females. They were investigating the camera when it first went in, but then pretty inactive for most of the night until the early hours of the morning, when they were active again for just a couple of hours. We know that this is also true in the wild because, yes, we do know what these snakes get up to at night when we're not looking, because they've done radio tracking studies, and wild behaviour shows that these snakes spend about 90% of their time underground, inactive, which exactly matches the pattern of behaviour that we've seen from my snakes on camera. There are also studies done on the ectoparasites of ball pythons. Surprise, surprise, females have exclusively terrestrial parasites, parasites that are found on the ground or in burrows. They contain no parasites from anywhere else. The males, also not surprisingly, contain a much larger sample of parasites, some of which are from the shrubs and trees of the surrounding countryside. So again, this indicates that it's the males that are doing the moving around. The females don't move around much at all. So at night, if you think your ball python is springing into action and climbing trees, it's probably not. I've said it many times before. For all you guys that have terrariums and say that your snakes like to explore and like to climb, I'm going to suggest that that's because something's wrong in the terrarium. This is not natural behaviour for a ball python. Ball pythons are not active all night long. They're active for very short periods, probably early evening and early in the morning, and the rest of the time they're inactive. So if your ball python is one of those ball pythons that likes to explore and climb like this guy, we have already seen that this guy was telling us there's something not right and I am not happy in this terrarium. And a simple move to a different location away from other males has solved that problem, showing that that is definitely not natural behaviour for a ball python. So again, if your ball python likes to climb and likes to explore, I'd be curious as to what it is that he's exploring for and what he's looking for. Okay guys, I'm not saying that snakes don't climb. Yes, they do. They can and they do climb, but it may not be natural behaviour. It may be adaptive behaviour, and in captivity what we need to be more cognizant of is stereotypical behaviour. We do not want to see stereotypical behaviour in our animals. Let me see if I can frame exploration for you in snake terms. When we talk about exploration, we talk about needing to go somewhere to find out what's there. A snake already knows what's there. Every time this guy flicks his tongue, he's remote sensing. He's building up a chemical picture of his world, and he knows exactly where everything is in that world. He doesn't need to go there to find out. So if your snake is constantly wanting to go somewhere, he already knows there's something there that he wants. Either that, or there's something that isn't there in where he is at the moment, so he needs to go somewhere else. Now, in captive animals, stereotypical behaviour, that's when an animal paces its cage backwards and forwards for no apparent purpose, is very difficult to observe in snakes. Number one, their behaviours are very subtle. Number two, physiologically, they tend not to waste any energy doing stuff that has no benefit. So you won't see a snake pacing its cage. What you will see in stereotypical behaviour is, for instance, repeated attempts to escape the enclosure on successive nights. Look at your snake in a different way and try to interpret what it's actually doing. It's not typical behaviour for a ball python to explore. It doesn't need to. It already knows what's out there from its remote sensing sense of smell. So, given that this guy is constantly exploring, even when he's in his tub or terrarium, and he knows exactly what's going on around him, it frames free roaming in a different context. Free roaming allows your snake to use its senses to build up a more detailed picture of its surroundings. And I'm going to show you a female that's free roaming, and you can contrast that behaviour to the way the terrarium snake was behaving when he was trying to escape. Totally different behaviour, and it's for a totally different reason. The snake is not interested in exploring the table or the paper rack. What the snake is interested in is the scent that's been left behind, the chemical signatures and messages that other snakes have left behind on that paper rack. Exploring, not really. It is, however, allowing your snake to be a snake. A snake does not forget that it's a snake just because it's kept in a tub. It does not exhibit fearful and shy behaviour because it's been abused by a previous owner. It does not suffer from malfunction of the brain and failure to develop nerve synapses because of lack of exercise. Your snake is exercising all those functions all the time. Allowing it to free roam just allows us to observe the snake doing it. So here's a female free roaming. Here's a female checking out the paper rack. This is a big mature female, big girl. But you can see the exact same behaviour . The very short, concentrated tongue flicks, and investigating every little nook and cranny of this paper rack. My snakes seem absolutely fascinated with this rack. They're all drawn to it like a magnet. There she goes, cocking her head to one side and getting really close to the paper rack there. The little short tongue flicks. Investigating every little nook and cranny. There is obviously something really fascinating about this paper rack. Remember, this is a female, not a male. Typically it's my males that like to free roam, but this girl wanted out this morning, so she's got out. She's free roaming. She can see the camera now. But look at the way she's cocking her head to catch the scent there, and notice she's rubbing her chin against the surface. Ball pythons typically hold their heads up when they're moving, but every so often she rubs her chin against the surface. Fascinating. So there we go, guys. That really does go against the grain, and I'm being extremely controversial, but all I'm doing is relating observations on my snakes confirmed with in-tub cameras, putting that into the context of research and making my own observations and conclusions. you are free to do the same. Don't take my word for it. I would recommend that you do observe your own snakes closely and try a few things with them, bearing in mind what I've told you about the habits of ball pythons. In particular, try moving your restless male away from the other males and see if that works. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.